I really feel that, with apologies to Captain Kirk, a better title for this talk would have been To Boldly Go Where No Man Has Gone Before. But I thought perhaps this was more appropriate, Endurance and Discovery. As Keith has said, it's very appropriate to start this series of talks with a talk on polar exploration because of the International Polar Year. And of course the Fellows have been very heavily involved in such exploration and the scientific knowledge gained from it since the Society's foundation. The globe which we have here, which is actually that one there, and which I'd be very happy for you to have a look at afterwards, was actually presented to Sir Joseph Banks, and it shows all the, who is our longest serving president, and it shows all the voyages of Captain James Cook, with additions up to 1807. Cook was one of the very few explorers who voyaged to both the Antarctic Circle and sought for the Northwest Passage. Usually, explorers did one or the other, but not many did both. If you look at the globe, you can see that the Arctic, the Antarctic, and even what we now know as Australia bears very little resemblance to the reality. So the need to find out about the world seems to have been a part of mankind's makeup since the beginning. Prehistoric populations expanded in search of new lands. The intrepid Norsemen swept down from the north to cover Europe down to Byzantium in the south and as far as Greenland in the west. In the late 15th and 16th centuries, the urge for discovery and trade gathered steady momentum and opened new horizons. New questions were being asked about the world in which man lived, the varieties of its phenomena, the nature of its laws, the means by which it could be understood. Whatever the initial conditions which made such exploration possible, the people who actually undertook these exploration were extraordinary, men of vision and reality and tenacity, driven by their desire to be first, to add to the sum of human knowledge. When Columbus set sail in 1492, the prospect of something at the other end was just a prospect. He didn't know he was going to actually get anywhere. There was no certainty that there would be land. All of these explorers were prepared to risk their lives in what was undoubtedly a very hazardous occupation. Richard Hakluyt, who wrote about the early voyages, describes in the preface to his 1589 work how he came to be interested in this new world himself, and particularly refers to Psalm 107, which encapsulated for him the attitude of the pioneer explorers. They that go down to the sea in ships and occupy their business in the great waters see the works of the Lord and his wonders in the deep. This is certainly a sentiment which the early fellows, such as Robert Boyle and Robert Hooke, would have agreed with, or indeed Captain Robert Scott, or indeed the modern astronaut. The earliest polar explorations took place in the Arctic in the 16th century, with a search by the Elizabethan navigators, mainly from England, in search of the Northwest Passage around America to the riches of Cathay, as China was then known. The Northwest Passage is the name for the sea route linking the North Atlantic Ocean. It extends from Baffin Bay, between West Greenland and Baffin Island, this is how we know it today, to the Bering Strait, which is between Alaska and Siberia, and through the Canadian Arctic archipelago. It was sought as a shortcut away from the influences of Portugal and Spain. Columbus's voyage of 1492 led to the discovery of the West Indies, and South America was circumnavigated by Magellan in 1520. Hence, a southwestern sea route had already been found into the Great South Sea or Pacific Ocean. Meanwhile, Vasco da Gama had rounded Africa and the Cape of Good Hope, and had discovered a southeast sea passage to India and China. And in the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494, Spain and Portugal accepted the Pope's line of demarcation between their spheres of influence, Portugal to the east and Spain to the west, leaving the Dutch and the English to search for shorter sea routes in the north. The northeast passage south of Eurasia and the northwest passage north of what came to be realised was the great landmass of North America, where no channel could be found in the lower latitudes. These early voyages suffered from three defects. First, the ships themselves. Until modern times, these were wooden ones. 3-masted ships were developed for long-distance travel, which offered a prospect of returning, even when winds were likely to be against them, although they could not penetrate the icy seas with the kind of ease that the modern icebreaker, or even the steam engines which were developed in the 19th century, made easy. Secondly, there was the problem of longitude, distance to the east or west, which was not solved until the 18th century, and which therefore had to be calculated roughly by dead reckoning, using a wooden log on a line to find the speed of the ship and hourglasses to tell the time. Thirdly, there was the problem of the ice itself. Changes of wind direction and tides can bring flows around a ship, or can pack ice off the coast, or can make a channel completely impassable. Then different layers of ice develop together, with the compression of the older ice leading to ridges which can form high cliffs, very menacing to a vessel, which can be beset and unable to move, and carried by wind or currents in any direction. Much of this kind of ice breaks up in the summer, creating therefore a very short navigational season. What we know about these pioneering navigators depends on what archival evidence survives. The 3 voyages of the bluff and rough Sir Martin Frobisher between 1576 and 1578 are well known, because his vivid first-hand accounts have been preserved. But the charts relating to these travels, such as those of John Davis, who came after Frobisher in 1616, were so altered over time that they even cast doubts on the voyages themselves. We learn a great deal about these early voyages from the work of Richard Hakluyt, who published between 1589 and 1600, a wonderful work which had the snappy title of The Principal Navigations, Voyages, Traffics and Discoveries of the English Nation, made by sea or overland to the remote and farthest distant quarters of the earth at any time within the compass of these 1,500 years. The voyages he listed include those of the heroic but barely literate Martin Frobisher, and between 1576 and 1578. The first voyage was definitely one of exploration, but the black stone that he brought back was thought to contain gold, and this, of course, inspired greed in his backers. So the objects of the next 2 voyages were prospecting and not exploring, although he did do some exploring among the Inuit, or the native Eskimos, at that time. In fact, the black stone turned out to be totally worthless, and it now makes a very nice wall in Priory Road in Dartford. John Davis was a Derbyshire man and an excellent navigator, known to John Dee, in whose house in 1584 he met Adrian Gilbert, who was a keen promoter of voyages, and Sir Francis Walsingham, the Secretary of State, who wanted to know more about Arctic discoveries. This is the drawing of the ostensible meeting. This meeting led to Davis's 3 voyages. These described and mapped the extensive area he'd explored, but also pointed work for his successors. Davis Strait is named after him. The image here is of the voyages of John Davis, as shown in Richard Hakluyt. Davis's log, or traverse book as he called it, reveals what a careful and accurate navigator he was. The publication of this plate was a serious attempt by Hakluyt to set out a standard form of log. There is even an Eskimo vocabulary included. Hakluyt's descriptions opened the eyes of the English people to the new real world, which was more amazing than the legends of medieval times. The 17th century saw voyages by Henry Hudson and William Baffin, both worthy successors to John Davis. These voyages had results which were not anticipated by their sponsors. Instead of trade with the Far East, they had furs from Hudson Bay, whale products from Davis Straits, and cod from the east coast of Labrador, and their geographical discoveries were considerable. The slow opening up of what we now call Canada and the founding of the Hudson's Bay Company were the most significant developments in the wake of discoveries of Hudson and earlier navigators. Though the company itself was not concerned with Arctic exploration or finding a route to the Pacific, its charter laid no obligation on it to search for this new passage. The exploration with which it was associated in North America inevitably extended the knowledge of the Arctic seas. This is Captain Christopher Middleton, who was a fellow and also worked for the Hudson's Bay Company. His voyages by way of Hudson Strait and Hudson Bay led to bitter controversy with one Arthur Dobbs, fellow, who had written a lengthy memorial on the Northwest Passage in 1731. There is a copy of it out on the side for you to see later. The Hudson Bay Company was not interested, but Dobbs managed to interest King George II, and so Middleton was commissioned and advised the Navy to fit out the furnace and the Discovery. The expedition carried out further surveys, but failed to find the passage. Dobbs and Middleton fell out, and Middleton's reputation was ruined. The controversy can be seen in the printed justification published by Dobbs in 1744 and Middleton's response, which is also out here on the side for you to see. Although the 18th century French explorers Bouvet and Kerguelen had discovered the subantarctic islands which were to be named after them, it was Captain James Cook, a Yorkshireman of humble origins, who initiated the systematic exploration of the Antarctic region during the second of his 3 voyages. He made the first crossing of the Antarctic Circle and attained the furthest south, 71 degrees. Accounts of exotic travel were very popular, so the publications which occurred after this voyage were sold out very quickly. Cook's third voyage was dedicated to finding the Northwest Passage, but in this he actually failed. However, he had brought back his charts, and for the first time the shape and position of the northwest coast of America takes shape, though not the shape that Cook had anticipated when he sailed from England in 1776. He had been misled by armchair cartographers such as this gentleman, who believed that beyond the ice which fringes the Arctic coasts an open polar sea existed, but for no particularly good reason. However, he managed to persuade lots of people that this was very true. Barrington's views seemed quite sensible at the time, and they were sufficient to influence the Royal Society, which then applied to Lord Sandwich for a naval expedition to be organised. This led to the voyage of Captain Constantine John Phipps, FRS, in 1773 to the North Pole. And although he was defeated by the sea ice at latitude 80 degrees north, his logbook records some very interesting data. You can have a look at it, it's over there. Another person who really finishes off the 18th century voyages was George Vancouver, who travelled on Cook's second voyage at the age of 15, and also on the third voyage. The surveying and cartographic skills he learned under Cook were put to use on this voyage of 1791 to 1794, when he surveyed the coasts of North America, West North America, which included Oregon, Washington, British Columbia, and Alaska. His explorations made it quite clear that for sailing ships, the Northwest Passage could never provide a route of commercial or strategic value. If it existed, it must lie among the ice of the Polar Sea. Although the 18th century explorers had not found a passage, because there was none where they searched, at the same time they had opened up the long Pacific coastline from California to the Bering Strait. Exploration thereafter would be by more dispassionate scientific navigators of another generation. And this is the man who dominated the first half of 19th century exploration. Of humble origins, he voyaged to the Arctic in a whaler and travelled with George Lord Macartney to Cape Colony. He was the founder of the Royal Geographical Society. And by the time he came to his office as Second Lord of the Admiralty in 1804, the search for the Northwest Passage was no longer a commercial challenge to reach China and the Far East, but a geographical challenge to understand and map the wide blank spaces in the Arctic regions. By the end of the Napoleonic Wars, England had a huge navy, and until the outbreak of the Crimean War in 1853, no major wars to fight at all. Sir John Barrow, then Second Secretary of the Admiralty from 1804 to 1845, was able, with the help of the First Lord, Lord Melville, also a fellow, to persuade the Admiralty to dispatch a whole series of British naval expeditions which culminated in Franklin's tragic voyage of 1845. Barrow, like Daines Barrington, believed in the open polar seas, and believed that a northern sea route to the Pacific could be found. Barrow instigated the first of his series of voyages in 1818. Lord Melville, the First Lord, received a letter from Sir Joseph Banks on behalf of the Society. 2 ships were to be sent towards the North Pole, one under the command of Lieutenant John Franklin, and 2 to seek the Northwest Passage. Franklin was a kinsman of and served with Matthew Flinders, better known for his connections with Australia. The North Pole expedition failed because the route could not be undertaken by small ships, only by today's powerful icebreakers, and they reflect the ignorance of their time. The only narrative of this voyage was published by Franklin's lieutenant, Frederick Beachy, in 1843. The other 2 ships sent to find the Northwest Passage were commanded by Captain John Ross with Lieutenant William Edward Parry, and produced an account of the voyage into Baffin's Bay and the search for the Northwest Passage. This is from something else, but anyway. He was assisted in the care of the many valuable instruments he took by Captain Edward Sabine, who had been recommended for his skill in astronomy and natural history. The failure to find the passage led to controversy between Ross and Barrow, inevitably, and the next expedition in 1819 was to be led by Lieutenant William Parry, with John Franklin leading an overland expedition. It's extremely interesting to see how intertwined these polar exploration of this period is, and the same people who keep on appearing in others' voyages. This is the voyage by Sir John and Sir James Clark Ross. James Clark Ross was the nephew of Sir John Ross. James Clark Ross was a fellow, Sir John Ross was not. He joined his uncle on a controversial voyage in search of the Northwest Passage in 1818. And this is an illustration from one of the things that they brought back. Between 1819 and 1827, he joined Edward Parry in 4 more expeditions to the Arctic. And between 1829 and 1833, spent another 4 years exploring the Arctic again. He located the position of the North Magnetic Pole, the first person to do so, on the Boothia Peninsula in northern Canada. In 1839, with Francis Crozier, he went on with the Erebus and the Terror to the Antarctic. So he's the second person after Cook to be able to go both the Arctic and the Antarctic. And along the way, he set up permanent stations for making magnetic observations. Interestingly, Crozier, though not a fellow, went with Franklin on his last voyage. He penetrated into the Ross Sea, discovered the Ross Ice Shelf and the Transantarctic Mountains, and made a further south journey to 78 degrees, which was not exceeded until 1900. Joseph Hooker, one of our fellows, was the expedition's assistant surgeon. Ross sailed back from the Antarctic in 1843. Like many young men growing up in the shadow of the Napoleonic Wars, Beachy admired heroic action, and his eventual choice of the Navy as a career was an amalgam of romantic and practical considerations. In his initial career, he gained experience in the preparation of charts and maps, and contributed to the Navy's surveying service, which was established to advise the Board of Admiralty on surveys and foster cooperation with the Royal Society and members of the Geophysical Sciences. He was with Franklin in the 1818 expedition, and with him in the overland expedition of 1819-22. In 1825, he was again sent to the Bering Strait to meet the Franklin and Parry expeditions, which were to arrive from the east. He was the first holder of the post of Superintendent of the Marine Department of the Board of Trade, created to ensure that ships would carry proper charts. Another one of our fellows, Sir William Parry, he led 4 expeditions between 1819 and 1827. And the one that everybody actually thinks of and knows most, Sir John Franklin. Although he disappeared on his last voyage, he actually had been on several others before then, and he was immensely experienced. The last voyage he went in left England in 1845, but then disappeared without trace. In the decade after 1847, inspired by the work of his wife, a large number of ships were dispatched to look for him, and while unable to find any survivors, they did add greatly to geographical knowledge of the Arctic. Sir Francis McClintock, another of our fellows, was a naval man who served in the Enterprise under James Clark Ross in 1848 and under Sir Erasmus Omani, a fellow also in the Arctic. His fame lies in the fact that he commanded the Fox in search of Franklin's lost expedition and finally brought back definite news of its fate. He was elected to the Society because he, and I quote, had brought to perfection the system of ice sledging by men, of which long journeys may be safely effected in the Arctic regions. And he made substantial and important additions to the sciences of geology, meteorology, magnetism, and the tides during his years of Arctic exploration. So Edward Sabine was one of, I think, the three important people in the 19th century. He was president for 10 years and, as well, 1861 to 1871. He was initially sent by the Royal Society on John Ross's expedition in search of the Northwest Passage in 1818, with Parry on the first British expedition to overwinter in 1819, and to make magnetic observations with Parry and James Clark Ross. His observations earned him the Copley Medal in 1821 and the ear of John Barrow, who became his patron and supported Sabine's projects in the Admiralty and the Royal Society. Sabine achieved fame by his magnetic crusade to yield a new understanding of the Earth's magnetism. This was truly a global project requiring huge amounts of data, understanding of the scientific laws, and a huge investment in facilities, instruments, and personnel. It also required, and received, political support from the Admiralty, the Royal Society, and numerous other bodies. Polar explorers such as James Clark Ross in his trip to the Antarctic also found themselves setting up magnetic observatories worldwide as part of their instructions. All of these individuals pioneered the field of scientific observations of the northern coast of America and the Arctic and the Antarctic. Various experiments by them all played an important role in the development and understanding of terrestrial magnetism, which resulted in safer navigational practice. Others, such as McClintock, became associated with geological observations. Ironically, it wasn't until the first International Polar Year in 1882-3 that a concerted effort to establish scientific discoveries as the major purpose of the expeditions occurred. With the Antarctic, the main expedition after Ross's voyage of 1843 was that of the Challenger expedition in 1872, and then there was nothing until the 6th International Geographical Congress in London in 1895 revived interest in the Antarctic, with their decision to make Antarctica a target for renewed exploration, and ushered in the heroic era. In this, the Royal Society had a large part to play. This is Sir Clements Markham, who I think had more influence than any at the end of the 19th century. He was president of the Royal Geographical Society and a fellow of the Royal Society, and in 1894 he invited the Royal Society to join with the Royal Geographical Society to finance the Antarctic project of his dreams. He was refused support by the Royal Society, and both the First Lord of the Admiralty and the Prime Minister, Lord Salisbury. It was only in 1897 when the Royal Geographical Society pledged £5,000 and a paint manufacturer pledged £25,000, thus gaining the attention of the Prince of Wales and many others, that in 1899 the government gave him a grant of £45,000, provided, this might sound very familiar, it was matched by private sources. A joint committee of the Royal Geographical Society and the Royal Society was established to organise the National Antarctic Expedition of 1901 to 1904, to acquire a ship and assemble the personnel. From the beginning, there were fireworks over conflicting aims. The Royal Society wanted scientific research. The Royal Geographical Society, an opportunity for research and scientific knowledge concerning magnetism, meteorology, biology and geology, as well as geographical discovery and the opportunity for young naval officers to win distinction in times of peace. There was conflict over the expedition leader, though Markham won out with selecting Robert Falcon Scott for this post. And there was conflict on the return with the writing up of results. One of the files of papers which we hold on this expedition has the title Animadversions by Captain Scott regarding the results. This expedition was notable for its ship, the Discovery, 6th of her name, and the first to be specifically designed and built for scientific work. Her bow had to be exceptionally strong. Among visitors, as she was being built, were 2 former colleagues who had sailed with Sir James Clark Ross, Sir Erasmus and Marney, who had sailed with Ross to the Arctic in 1835, and the famous botanist Sir Joseph Hooker, naturalist in Ross's Erebus and Terror expedition. As this particular ship set sail on the 6th of August in 1901, having survived a visit by the Queen, who managed to drop her dog over the side, Markham noted, "No finer set of men ever left these shores, nor were men ever led by a finer captain." Reports by Scott can be seen over on the side here afterwards. This was the first expedition of what came to be called the heroic age of Antarctic exploration. Although Scott failed in his attempt to sledge to the South Pole, he did make a further south of 82 degrees, and a great deal of important scientific research was undertaken, following Royal Society guidelines, including the first comprehensive survey of the Ross Sea area. Scott's account, The Voyage of the Discovery, has become a classic of Antarctic literature, and the South Polar Times, a monthly journal compiled by members of the expedition, is very entertaining and can be looked at over there. Almost as a postscript to this, one of the officers appointed for this expedition was Ernest Shackleton, appointed to take charge of holds, stores, provisions, and deep water analysis. He was forced to leave the expedition in 1903, but this started his career in exploring the Antarctic. Going on the 1907 to 1909 expedition, where the search for funding for an expedition at the same time led him to fall out with Scott, and on the Imperial Transantarctic expedition of 1914-16 and the Shackleton Rowett expedition of 1921 to 22, all of which he led. His expedition, including Douglas Mawson, though not he himself, reached the South Pole in January 1909. Antarctica is the coldest, windiest, and because of the thickness of its ice cap, the highest continent. It's the 5th largest continent and the only one lacking indigenous inhabitants. Antarctica, like the Arctic, has been the arena for many heroic exploits of discovery, exploration, and survival. But it has also become an important laboratory for peaceful scientific research, governed by a unique legal system grounded on the Antarctic Treaty, which ensures that the continent's sovereignty is not subject to that of any single state. The search for scientific knowledge in the polar regions, to which the Society and its fellows have made great contributions, is still continuing. I leave you with images of these 2 souvenirs brought back from the first Halley Bay base, established in 1956 in the International Geophysical Year, in which the Society played such a large part. This is to show that not all archives or visitors' books are made of paper, and if you're going to bring back a souvenir, why not pick up a penguin? All right. Thank you.